What are you thankful for on day 10 of 30 Days of Thanks? Up with inspiration. And what do you do when you find a man in a pool of blood with his wrist both slit? When you were 13 years old, did you ever want a motorcycle? I did. But the problem was, in Florida, you couldn't have a driver's license until you were 14 years old to drive a motorcycle, and then you could only drive one during the daytime, had to have it in by an hour after sunset until you were 16 years old. But my friend, Richard Lafise, older brother Sonny, did have a motorcycle, and it was a beauty. He was already 14 years old. And boy, did that little bike look good. I wanted one, and I wanted one bad. And the next year, I turned 14 years old. And I wanted the motorcycle real bad. As a matter of fact, as soon as I turned 14 in February, I kept asking my dad, "Dad, could I get a motorcycle?" And he says, "Well, son, I don't know." "Oh, Dad, can I get a motorcycle?" "Mom, could I get a motorcycle?" My mother was very hesitant. My father was starting to give in. He says, "You know, B, he's pretty careful." She goes, "I know, but they're so dangerous." Well, they started going out with me and looking at motorcycles. And we went here and we went there. We went to the Harley-Davidson shop. We went to the Vespa shop. We went to the Yamaha shop. We went to the Honda shop. And we looked at all the different bikes. And I really liked looking at those motorcycles. And I said, "I like this one. I like this one. I like this one." Well, time went on. I had no motorcycle. Finally, it was summertime. Still no motorcycle. My dad said, "Bobby, why don't you, Mom, and I go out and look some more for some motorcycles?" So we went out. The first place we went to was the Honda shop. We went inside the Honda shop, and he says, "Is there anything in here you like?" And I said, "Yeah, Dad." He says, "Well, look at this one over here. It's got your name on it." My dad had already picked it out and paid for it. He knew which one I wanted. It was a beautiful little Honda 50 C110. 5 brake horsepower, as big as you could get at that age. And it was already bought. And I now owned a motorcycle. Oh boy, was I excited. Well, about the same time, my friend Jimmy Audette, who we had moved down to Florida with just a few years before, he got the same bike. So we both had Honda 50 C110s with upswept mufflers. Oh, those were sharp-looking bikes. And if you really goosed it, you could get it up to 50 miles an hour, which wasn't too bad. One of the things I loved the most about my motorcycle is on the weekends, on Sunday, I could go off and see the people I wanted to see. And it was fantastic. I'd go to football practice at school, and after I was done football practice, I'd just ride my bike home. Sometimes I'd stop off and check out a new business that was happening in town, or go down a street that I had never gone down, exploring the town. I got to know all these little towns, and it was just a heyday having my little bike. It was fun. And boy, I'll tell you, we went everywhere on those little bikes. We lived in Orlando. It was still a long time before Disney World was being built. And it was still swamp country and a lot of great things to see. We had a great time. We went to Daytona Beach, New Smyrna Beach, Jacksonville, Florida, St. Augustine, Gainesville, Palatka. We went out to Dade Battlefield out by Tampa. We went down south by Lake Okeechobee. And one day, we decided to go see Gatorland in Kissimmee, which was just a little tiny spot on the map in those days. Kissimmee was just a little tiny place. That's where Disney World ended up being. But not then. So we parked our bikes right in front of Gatorland. It had the big mouth of the alligator in front, and we went inside. And inside there they had this big crocodile, not just an alligator, but a crocodile that they had caught years ago And the crocodile was over 100 years old. His name was Bone Crusher, and he was classified as the largest crocodile in the entire world. He was massive, but was he old? Well, I'll tell you, there were gators everywhere and snakes everywhere, but it was safe. Everything was off the path, and if you watched yourself, you could stay pretty safe. I don't know if anybody that really got hurt, but I'm sure sooner or later somebody did. But we had a good time that day, and on the way out, the guy says, how about a donation in the tip jar here? I said, well, we don't have any extra money. He says, well, you got those bikes out there. What about gas? I said, sir, gas is 19.9 cents a gallon, and the bikes only hold 1.2 gallons. For a quarter, we can get a gallon of gasoline and give the guy a tip. I said, but we don't have much more than a quarter, sir, and we need gas. So, anyway, that's the way it went, and we went to another place, and we just had a ball. Well, time went on, and eventually that bike got quite a few miles on it. It was starting to push on 20,000 miles. Well, for a 50cc bike, that's a lot of miles. Needed to be rebuilt. Just so happens, my dad, who was one of the most caring persons in the world, had a friend who was a mechanic and was a motorcycle cop. His name was Harry Gilbert. He had the big old Harley in the motorcycle force in Orlando, Florida, and Harry was as kind as the day is long. He loved kids, he loved people, and he really liked my dad. So Harry found out that my bike was getting older and needed to be overhauled, and he says, Roger, he says, I want to overhaul your son's bike. He says, oh, that's great, I'll pay you for it. He said, no, I'll do it for you for nothing. Well, it was a big job. Every night, Harry was at his garage working on my motorcycle. He must have been out there for weeks. And he was all doing it part-time, you know. He was still working full-time as a cop and doing everything. And one day I saw him over at the Burger King, and he was having a milkshake, and I says, thank you, Harry, for fixing my motorcycle. He says, well, it's coming along pretty good. I'll have it done real soon. And he hopped on his motorcycle and took off. Bum, 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 bum. About a week later, I got my bike back, and I was out there driving it again. Well, Jimmy and I used to have a lot of fun, and one time he ran over some glass, and I said, Jimmy, you got to watch out for that glass, man. He says, Bobby, glass is not going to cut your tires. It's not going to go through your tires. I says, yes, it will. He says, and you know what? He says, you ought to change your motorcycle seat. He says, because eventually that crappy Honda seat is going to crack, and you're going to have to replace it anyway. I said, Jimmy, Honda motorcycle seats don't crack. Well, about 2 weeks later, Jimmy went over some glass, and sure enough, he got a flat tire. 2 weeks after that, I went outside, and from the sun, my motorcycle seat had cracked. And we laughed about that one until we were in our early 20s. I mean, just great, great times. And then one day I was reading the newspaper, and my friend Harry Gilbert was on his motorcycle on off-duty time, and some truck ran a red light, a big trailer truck. And Harry was approaching that light, couldn't stop, went under the truck, and he was decapitated. And I was so sad. But I think by the time you get to the end of this video, you're going to find out that Harry just might be okay. Of 1972 at the University of Florida, we had a weightlifting team, and like so many teams, we had a tendency to take care of each other. As a matter of fact, a lot of people would care for us because we were one of those small teams, a team that wasn't big like the football team or the baseball team or the basketball team that brought in a lot of money for the university. No, we were a club that started up with university players that wanted to really lift weights and become some of the best in the world. And we did. There was this one newspaper reporter by the name of Chuck Partouche that used to do great stories on us. Every time we'd have a contest, he'd do it up big. And so we began to gain recognition, and that care meant a lot to us as lifters. We took care of each other also. What a wonderful team we had. We had people who were very, very small lifting enormous weights, and we had people who were larger lifting huge weights. It was just a very successful team. We won the state title every year. And then we got invited to the divisional championships and even the national championship. And in this part of 1972, my senior year, we were invited to go to the collegiate nationals. So we did. We headed out of state, went north through Jacksonville on the Greyhound bus, and then way up north to participate in the national contest. We got there, we did well. We ended up having a great time, placing high, and then took a ride back to Florida with all of our trophies and getting together and having meals together. We pulled into Jacksonville, Florida, because we had to switch buses there. And when we did, Mike, one of the younger persons on the team, had to use the restroom. So he left, came back shortly thereafter and said, "Bob," his eyes were all popped out. He says, "There's a man in the bathroom lying under the stall in a big pool of blood in the area surrounding Jerusalem." And Jesus was beginning to become very popular. And he began to tell people that he had the power to give them eternal life. And the leaders in the synagogue and the chief priests did not like this at all, because it was definitely threatening their influence in Jerusalem. The leaders took up stones to stone Jesus. This had happened many times, and now Jesus, one more time, escaped, and this time went beyond the Jordan where John the Baptist had been baptizing before he had been beheaded. And Jesus went out into the wilderness and stayed there. And while he was there, he got message that came to him that his friend Lazarus was dying. So Jesus, knowing that Lazarus was dying, decided to tarry 2 more days beyond the Jordan. People began to wonder why he was doing this. And he says, "I want you to see the glory of God." After those 2 days, Jesus made the journey to Bethany, which is about 2 miles outside of the city of Jerusalem. And as he was coming near town, Martha came up to Jesus and said, "Master, my brother has died, and if you had been here, he would be alive." And Jesus said, "Your brother will live." And she says, "I know he's going to live in the resurrection." She says, "But if you had been here, you would have lived." And Jesus told Martha, "I am the resurrection and the life." Soon Mary came out, and Mary was beside herself. She says, "Oh, Master, if you had come, my brother would be alive." Jesus said, "Take me to Lazarus." And they took him to the tomb of Lazarus, and he said, "Remove the stone." And the sister says, "He's been dead for 4 days. By now his body is stinking." And Jesus said, "Remove the stone." And they removed the stone. And Jesus said, "Lazarus, come forth." And immediately Lazarus, bound in his burial clothes, walked out of the tomb. Jesus said, "Unbind him and let him go." When the Jews found out that Lazarus had been raised from the dead, they wanted to kill Jesus. And somehow, some way, they wanted to find a way to kill Lazarus also. Jesus was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane and taken to Herod. And Herod not wanting to do anything on the Passover, turned him over to Pontius Pilate, who was the governor at the time of that area. And Pilate attempted to release Jesus, but the Jews would have nothing to do with it. The leaders of the Jews said, crucify him, and they got the crowd riled up. And sure enough, Pilate finally caved and had Jesus taken away and crucified on the cross. And when he died, there was a man who cared enough, one of his own disciples who was very rich, who had a tomb close by, so that before the sun went down, they would be able to get him into a tomb. And he gave his tomb away to Jesus that he might be buried there. His name was Joseph, and he was from Arimathea. So Jesus was placed into the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. And a large stone was placed in front of the tomb, sealed, and the soldiers kept guard. And things were about to get very heavy because Jesus had completed the work that his Father had sent him to do. Mike said, Bob, there's a man up there in a pool of blood. And I thought, what can I do? Well, I immediately went up there, ran up to the restroom, walked in. I was all alone. And in the first stall of the John was a man lying in a large pool of blood with both of his wrists slit wide open. Razor blade was right there next to him. I looked at him and I thought, I don't know if this man is dead or not, but I'm going to be doing everything I can to save his life. So taking care, I pulled him out of the stall and lay him on the ground in the bathroom and thought, disease or no disease, I've got to give this man mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. I don't know if he's alive or dead, but I pray that he'll start breathing once again. And I began breathing into his mouth, coming back, moving his chest, breathing into his mouth, working his chest, breathing into his mouth. This went on for a while. Suddenly, he began to breathe. First, just a little breath, and then full breaths. And I saw that man go from death to life. And on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb, but the stone had been rolled away, and there were two angels on either end of the stone. And as they spoke to her, she turned and saw a man there, and she thought it was the gardener. And she began to weep. And he says, "Why are you weeping?" She says, "Because they've taken my Lord, and I don't know where you have laid him." And he says, Mary. And she recognized that it was Jesus. And he had risen from the dead.